From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
What was done, it does not look at all like a Muslim ban.
This is a ban that really does fall almost exclusively on Muslims.
The U.S. Supreme Court appears poised to uphold President Trump's latest travel ban, blocking most people from 7 countries, including Iran, Libya, Somalia, Syria, and Yemen, from entering the United States. We'll hear part of the oral arguments, get response, and look at the case of a U.S. citizen in Yemen whose daughter has cerebral palsy. Despite her condition and her need of desperate medical attention, the U.S. has denied her entry. Then we air a secretly taped audio recording revealing a leading Democratic Party official, House Democratic Whip Steny Hoyer, pressuring a progressive Democrat to drop out of a congressional race in Colorado. Then we look at how aid agencies are scrambling to relocate thousands of Rohingya refugees from crowded camps in southeastern Bangladesh ahead of the monsoon season's heavy rains. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The U.S. Supreme Court appears poised to uphold President Trump's travel ban, which blocks most people from 7 countries, including Iran, Libya, Somalia, Syria, and Yemen, from entering the United States. During oral arguments on Wednesday, Justice Anthony Kennedy, who is often seen as a swing vote, appeared to side with the conservative wing of the court. U.S. Solicitor General Noel Francisco argued the travel restrictions were not a, quote, so-called Muslim ban, and that the order fell within the president's executive authority. Francisco made the claim even though Trump campaigned for president, calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. This is Justice Samuel Alito.
If you look at what was done, it does not look at all like a Muslim ban. There are other justifications that jump out as to why these particular countries were put on the list. So it seems to me the list creates a strong inference that this was not done for that invidious purpose.
We'll have more on President Trump's travel ban after headlines. Meanwhile, the Trump administration Wednesday canceled temporary protected status for about 9,000 Nepali immigrants who now face the prospect of deportation from the U.S. The move came exactly 3 years after a devastating earthquake in Nepal killed almost 9,000 people. President Trump's nominee to head the Department of Veterans Affairs appears poised to withdraw from consideration amidst mounting scandals. On Wednesday, new details emerged about White House physician Admiral Ronnie Jackson's behavior, including allegations he drunkenly wrecked a government vehicle and created a hostile work environment for his colleagues. Jackson also allegedly routinely handed out prescription drugs to West Wing staff, including the opioid Percocet, the sleeping pill Ambien, and the stimulant modafinil, given to senior White House officials on international trips. Reports have also surfaced Dr. Jackson once drunkenly banged on the hotel room door of a female employee during an overseas work trip in 2015 late at night until the Secret Service intervened. President Trump and his aides spent much of Wednesday publicly defending Jackson against the charges. Lawmakers from both parties have raised concern that Jackson has no experience heading a vast government bureaucracy like the Veterans Administration, the second largest agency in the U.S. government. President Trump fired the previous VA chief, Dr. David Shulkin, who later said it was because of his opposition to Trump's plans to privatize the VA. EPA Chief Scott Pruitt heads to Capitol Hill today, where he'll face questions about a slew of Inspector General investigations into his spending habits and ties to industry lobbyists. Pruitt faces more than a half-dozen inquiries, including charges he paid just $50 a night to live in a Capitol Hill condo linked to a prominent Washington lobbyist whose firm represents a roster of fossil fuel companies. Pruitt then lied by saying the lobbyist did not have business before the EPA. Pruitt had a $43,000 soundproof phone booth installed in his office, which a government watchdog agency says violates spending laws. Pruitt had the EPA spend $3 million on a security detail, including 18 full-time agents. He later demoted officials who challenged his use of those funds and fired a security agent who refused to turn on his car's emergency sirens in order to speed through Washington, D.C. traffic. Pruitt routinely travels first or business class. An EPA official told Politico it's because Pruitt was routinely confronted by economy-class customers angry over his policies. When away from home, Pruitt stays in luxury hotels Daniels and his international travel expenses have soared into six figures. And as Oklahoma Attorney General, Pruitt used a private email for state business. He later told the Senate Environment Committee he hadn't. President Trump's personal lawyer and fixer, Michael Cohen, signaled Wednesday he'll claim the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination when a lawsuit filed by adult film star Stephanie Clifford, also known as Stormy Daniels, heads to trial. The president has previously criticized people for taking the Fifth. This is Donald Trump speaking just before the election.
Here's people taking the Fifth Amendment. 4 people plus the guy who illegally did the server. You know, he put in the illegal server. So there are 5 people taking the Fifth Amendment, like you see on the mob, right? You see the mob takes the Fifth. If you're innocent, why are you taking the Fifth Amendment?
By pleading the Fifth, Michael Cohen can avoid being deposed and being forced to reveal information about hush money payments paid to Stormy Daniels and to Karen McDougal, another woman President Trump is alleged to have had an affair with. The payments are a central focus of a criminal probe launched by New York prosecutors against Cohen, which became public after FBI agents raided Cohen's home, offices, and hotel room. Court papers filed Wednesday show President Trump has offered to personally review documents seized by the FBI in that raid in Trump's latest bid to claim attorney-client privilege in order to prevent prosecutors from reading over the materials. French President Emmanuel Macron addressed a joint session of the U.S. Congress Wednesday, drawing a 3-minute standing ovation as he took the podium. Macron claimed the U.S. and France share the values of liberty, tolerance, and equal rights, and spent much of his 50-minute speech swiping at President Trump's policies on trade and the environment. He also urged the U.S. not to withdraw from the Iran nuclear agreement.
To say that this agreement may not address all concerns, and very important concerns. This is true. But we should not abandon it without having something substantial and more substantial instead. That's my position.
President Macron just signaled he believes that President Trump will withdraw from the Iran nuclear agreement before the deadline mid-May. In the Gaza Strip, Palestinian journalist Ahmed Abu Hussein died on Wednesday from wounds he sustained while covering protests against Israel's occupation. Hussein was shot in the abdomen April 13th, even though he was wearing protective gear, clearly marked press. He's the second Palestinian journalist killed since large-scale protests erupted in Gaza on March 30th. Earlier this month, Yasser Martaja was shot and killed by an Israeli sniper under similar circumstances. In Kandahar, Afghanistan, gunmen assassinated Afghan journalist Abdul Manan Argand on Tuesday as he was driving his car during the morning rush hour. Police say 2 attackers riding on a motorcycle fled the scene and remain at large. The killings already had a chilling effect on Afghan reporters. This is Abdul Sami of the media group Nai.
Until the safety of journalists are guaranteed and the perpetrators of Abdul Manan's killing are arrested, we will not broadcast any news from the south of the country.
The killing came on the same day officials met in the Afghan capital, Kabul, to discuss ways to protect journalists. The Afghan Journalist Safety Committee says last year was the deadliest yet for media workers, with 20 killed and scores more assaulted or threatened. In Okinawa, Japan, hundreds of protesters are in the midst of a week-long demonstration against the construction of a massive new U.S. Marine Corps base. On Wednesday, riot police moved in to arrest scores of people as they held a nonviolent sit-in protest at the gates of Marine Corps Camp Schwab. Activists in about 80 canoes and boats also held a protest offshore. Okinawan peace activists have fought for decades for the expulsion of U.S. troops from their island. Back in the United States, Housing and Urban Development Secretary Ben Carson proposed legislation Wednesday that would triple the rent of the lowest-income families who receive federal housing subsidies. Carson's Making Affordable Housing Work Act would also require many recipients of Section 8 housing assistance to work at least 15 hours a week. Nearly 5 million households would be affected. In Sacramento, California, police arrested 17-year-old former police officer Joseph James DeAngelo on Wednesday, saying they have DNA evidence he's the Golden State Killer, a serial rapist and murderer who terrorized California in the 70s and 80s. The killer was blamed for at least 12 murders, 50 rapes, and a slew of burglaries and other crimes. This is Bruce Harrington, brother of one of the killer's victims.
To the entire reservoir of victims out there, my sadness is with you. For the 51 ladies who were brutally raped in this crime scene, sleep better tonight. He isn't coming through the window.
James D'Angelo is 72 years old. Philippines peace activist Jerome Abba is speaking out after he was held for 28 hours by U.S. Customs and Border Protection officials at San Francisco International Airport last week before being denied entry into the U.S. Abba says the border agents accused him of being a terrorist, ordered him to strip naked, denied him food for nearly 24 hours, then offered him only pork to eat in an insult to his Muslim faith. This is Jerome Abba describing the ordeal.
When I arrived at the San Francisco airport, they immediately took me and handcuffed me. Then they interrogated me until they deported me back to the Philippines. They asked me again and again if I am a terrorist, if I am a communist. This I denied. I am not a terrorist. I am an activist.
To tour the U.S. to speak out about Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte's bloody war on drugs, which human rights groups say has led to the extrajudicial killings of up to 8,000 people. President Trump has cited Duterte's drug policies favorably as part of Trump's push to bring the death penalty to drug dealers here. And the National Memorial for Peace and Justice opens today in Montgomery, Alabama, a monument to victims of white supremacy in the United States. The museum's centerpiece is a walkway with 800 weathered steel pillars overhead, each of them naming a U.S. county and the people who were lynched there by white mobs. The museum's creation was overseen by Brian Stevenson of the Equal Justice Initiative, who says more than 4,400 black people died by lynching throughout U.S. history. Stevens spoke to Democracy Now! In 2014.
Lynching was horrific and terrifying, and we don't talk about it. We put markers about the Confederacy in front of these courthouses, but we don't say a word about the thousands of people that were lynched, hundreds of whom were lynched on courthouse lawns.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. The U.S. Supreme Court appears poised to uphold President Trump's travel ban, which blocks most people from 7 countries, including Iran, Libya, Somalia, Syria, and Yemen, from entering the United States. During oral arguments on Wednesday, Justice Anthony Kennedy, who's often seen as a swing vote, appeared to side with the conservative wing of the court. U.S. Solicitor General Noel Francisco argued the travel restrictions were not a, quote, so-called Muslim ban, and that the order fell within the president's executive authority. Francisco made the claim even though Trump campaigned for president, calling for, quote, a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
Lower courts have repeatedly ruled against versions of Trump's travel ban, saying they were unconstitutional and in violation of federal immigration law. Neil Katyal argued against the ban in the Supreme Court case, which was brought by the state of Hawaii. This is Justice Samuel Alito questioning Katyal.
Mr. Katyal, would any reasonable observer reading this proclamation, without taking into account statements, think that this was a Muslim ban? I mean, I think there are 50 predominantly Muslim countries in the world. Five predominantly Muslim countries are on this list. The population of the predominantly Muslim countries on this list make up about 8% of the world's Muslim population. If you looked at the 10 countries with the most Muslims, exactly one, Iran, would be on that list of the top 10. So would a reasonable observer think this was a Muslim ban?
If it were just the text of the order alone, it might raise eyebrows for fit and other reasons that the briefs go into, but we wouldn't be here. We absolutely agree that it's the same test as in Lukumi and other cases. You have to look to all the circumstances around it that are said, the publicly available ones. You know, in Justice Alito, the fact that the order only encompasses some Muslim countries, I don't think means it's not religious discrimination. For example, if I'm an employer and I have 10 African Americans working for me and I only fire 2 of them, I don't think, and say, well, I've left the other 8 in. I don't think anyone can say that's not discrimination.
No, I understand that. And it is one of our fundamental values that there is religious freedom here for everybody and that adherents to every religion are entitled to equal treatment. My only point is that if you look at what was done, it does not look at all like a Muslim ban. There are other justifications that jump out as to why these particular countries were put on the list. So it seems to me the list creates a strong inference that this was not done for that invidious purpose.
Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito questioning Neil Katyal during oral arguments Wednesday on President Trump's travel ban. We're joined now by two guests. Lee Gallant is Deputy Director of the ACLU's National Immigrants' Rights Project. He presented the first challenge to President Trump's travel ban order last year. Diala Shamas is staff attorney at the Center for Constitutional Rights. She was in Djibouti last month speaking to many Yemeni relatives of U.S. citizens attempting to come to the United States under Trump's travel ban. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Lee, let's begin with you. You brought the first challenge in a Brooklyn court. You're watching this in Supreme Court. Explain what happened and what you think the outcome will be based on the questions of the Supreme Court justices.
Yeah, I mean, I would hesitate to predict. I never predict. There was definitely some skepticism about our challenge. There was not a lot of talk about religious discrimination, much less than I think maybe the public would have thought. I think the question that most people who are non-lawyers probably have is, we all understand what the president was doing. Why is there this restricted inquiry in court where they're not taking into account all the president's statements, all the tweets? And what the government has argued is, well, you shouldn't look at what someone says during the campaign. We'll see whether the court looks at it. Most of the discussion centered on whether the president, regardless of religious discrimination, overstepped his authority that Congress has given him. And I think that's ultimately where the fight's going to be on the court. Did Congress give the president this type of authority to ban 150 million Muslims without serious justification?
Well, I mean, Alito also, in the clip that we played, says that the ban only applies to 5 Muslim countries, and of course there are many more than that, and therefore it can't be read as a Muslim ban. So your response to that?
Yeah, I think the response given in court was correct. Well, what if you had just 10 African Americans working for you, and those are the only people that you took 3 of them and fired them for no reason and fired no white people? I think that's the correct response. You would still say there's discrimination going on. What we feel like is they added North Korea and they added Venezuela as window dressing.
Well, I wanted to turn to Justice Elena Kagan, who questioned Solicitor General Noel Francisco.
So this is a hypothetical that you've heard a variant of before, that the government has at any rate, but I want to just give you... let's say in some future time, a president gets elected who is a vehement anti-Semite and says all kinds of denigrating comments about Jews and provokes a lot of resentment and hatred over the course of a campaign and in his presidency. And in the course of that, asks his staff or his cabinet members to issue recommendations so that he can issue a proclamation of this kind, and they dot all the I's and they cross all the T's. And what emerges, and again in the context of this virulent anti-Semitism, what emerges is a proclamation that says no one shall enter from Israel.
Right.
Do you say Mandel puts an end to judicial review of that set of facts?
No, Your Honor. I don't say Mandel puts an end to it, but I do say that in that context, Mandel would be the starting point of the analysis because it does involve the exclusion of aliens, which is where Mandel applies. If his cabinet, and this is a very tough hypothetical that we've dealt with throughout, but if his cabinet were to actually come to him and say, Mr. President, there is honestly a national security risk here and you have to act, I think then that the president would be allowed to follow that advice, even if it's in his private heart of hearts he also harbored animus.
So that was Elena Kagan questioning Solicitor General Noel Francisco. Diala Shamas, your response to this line of questions, if you just said no one from Israel can come in.
Right. One of the, I think what's obvious about that is it is hypothetical that really isn't so much a hypothetical, because if you just switched the Jewish identification with Muslim identifications, you have exactly what has happened here. Watching the Solicitor General kind of waver a little bit in his response there, I think really signaled the level of discomfort that he had, and that the government is going to ultimately be facing when it comes to the crux of the issue here, which is the issue of discrimination and the constitutionality of the ban.
Well, can you give us a sense, Diala, for people who aren't quite aware of what the impact of this ban has been and will be in the event that it's kept in place? Who are the people who are most impacted? You were in Djibouti last month speaking to Yemenis, so can you talk about that as well as the other people who are included in this list, 150 million?
So one of the reasons we went to Djibouti in the first place was in order to be able to go to where the impact was being experienced. So as you may recall, with the first executive order, people rushed to the airports, and the sense of chaos was very palpable right here in the U.S. And the moment we sort of shifted to consular processing, where people who are no longer in mid-flight are being banned, but people who are applying for visas at consulates are banned, it's not as visible, and that makes it much more difficult to really understand the scope of the human impact that the ban has had. And we felt it was really important to go to Djibouti, which is where many Yemeni applicants went to get their visas processed, due to the fact that the consulate in Djibouti itself, the U.S. Embassy in Djibouti, in Yemen, pardon me, closed down in 2015 due to the war in Yemen. So many of them had to travel, make a long and arduous journey to Djibouti in order to finish processing their visa petitions in order to rejoin their families. So most Yemenis are actually the direct relatives, usually children, spouses of U.S. citizens or U.S. lawful permanent residents. And many of them headed to Djibouti for their interviews, either before the stay of the Supreme Court the stay of the ban was lifted by the Supreme Court on December 4th, or afterwards to attend an interview. And then what happened was, the moment the stay was lifted in December, they received en masse denials of their visa petitions. So families who had been there expecting to wait 2-3 weeks pending processing of their visa petition ended up being in Djibouti for 6 months, and some people we spoke with were there for 2 years.
And so many of them are American citizens who are trying to bring their families.
Almost everyone we spoke with were U.S. citizens and their non-citizen wives, usually husbands, children, parents.
Or sick children, and that's the issue we want to go to right now. I want to turn to Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch, questioning attorney Neil Katyal, who's representing the state of Hawaii, which sued the Trump administration over the ban. Katyal, the former acting Solicitor General of the United States. This begins with Justice Gorsuch.
Proceeding so far on the assumption that we can reach the merits. But the government makes the argument, for example, that aliens who are removed from this country have to bring their claims personally, and third parties can't vindicate those rights of aliens who are present in this country, and asks the question why it should be that third persons should be able to assert the rights of aliens who are not present in this country. What's the answer to that?
Well, several. This is not a third-party case. These are United States citizens bringing this challenge in a state of the United States.
Aliens not present in the country.
They are directly harmed themselves. Let me just give you one example, not just the state of Hawaii, whose university is directly impacted, but let's just take, for example, Mr. Alamari, the 10-year-old in the PARS equality brief, Justice Breyer, that you're referring to. This is a 10-year-old daughter in Yemen who's trying to come here because
I understand that, but those arguments don't.
Turn to the issue of that 10-year-old Yemeni girl with cerebral palsy mentioned by Neil Katyal during the Supreme Court oral arguments. She is featured in a new Al Jazeera documentary called Between War and the Ban, a Yemeni-American story, which tells the story of Yemenis trying to come to the U.S., often to reunite with family members. In this clip, her father, a U.S. citizen named Najib al-Omari, talks to reporter Sharif Abdel-Quddus of Fault Lines about his daughter's deteriorating medical condition and the U.S. denial of visas for his daughter.
All the problems after the war. There is no medical care. The medical system and the country have collapsed. Her condition is a consequence of the war.
Najib's eldest daughter, 11-year-old Shaymet, was born with cerebral palsy, making it more urgent for her to get adequate medical care, something that's become increasingly difficult in Yemen.
Proper medicine isn't available, only substitutes. But the substitutes are smuggled through the desert, and the heat ruins them.
How did that affect her?
It really affected her. Look at her now. She wasn't like this before.
Again, that clip from Al Jazeera English, Sharif Abdul Qudus's report. Diala Shamas, tell us about this family, this little girl that her father is saying she can't get the medicines in Yemen. Now they're in Djibouti. They can't even afford to stay there. He did not think this was going to be an issue. He himself is an American citizen, and she is just deteriorating.
Yeah, so Mr. El-Omari's case is very illustrative of, and the reason I think in part why it was brought up at the Supreme Court was this is a family who at the very least should be given a waiver under the travel ban or the proclamation. So the waiver scheme is something that's in the proclamation that allows consular officers to provide a waiver on a case-by-case basis to anybody who meets a sort of set criteria that's set out in that proclamation. So you would be covered by the ban if you're a Yemeni national. However, a consular officer may provide this discretionary waiver if they believe that it would cause undue hardship to not be allowed entry, and if it were in the best interest of the United States, and if entry wouldn't present a threat to national security. And then it goes out to list some examples of who may be eligible for a waiver. And young Shaima fits several of the criteria. She's trying to rejoin her parents. She has an extreme medical condition.
She's just laying there in bed, and he said she was not always like this.
She deteriorated while in Djibouti, and she was denied a waiver. So she actually has a letter denying her visa and also saying she was found ineligible for a waiver. So this is really emblematic of the sense of chaos that the administration has had from the start and from the get-go around the travel ban. So people like Mr. Al-Omari are trying to navigate the system, are trying to do their best to try to petition for waivers, but look everywhere for guidance on how to do that and aren't able to find any. So you would think that at least with her, and frankly many others, and she's a very extreme case that's illustrative of this problem, but there's so many other people that we met in Djibouti who should qualify for a waiver, and yet what we know is that nobody's been getting them. And so they're sitting there in Djibouti under extremely difficult conditions. Djibouti is an extremely expensive country to live in part because the economy is inflated due to so many foreign military bases, including the U.S. military base. And so they're spending thousands of dollars a month, usually borrowing from relatives here in the U.S. to simply be able to sustain themselves for months and months, and in some cases years.
Well, let's go to a clip from yesterday's oral arguments at the Supreme Court on the question of the waivers. This is Justice Stephen Breyer and Solicitor General Noel Francisco. The clip begins with Breyer.
I looked at this order, and this has case-by-case exceptions. And then it says, it says case-by-case waivers may be appropriate in individual circumstances, such as, giving some examples, the following. And then they have to be no terrorists. Well, that's the law anyway. And they have to be in the interest of the United States, and there can't be undue hardship, which the only time that the word hardship appears in the immigration laws, it says extreme hardship. So undue must be less than extreme. In countries of 150 million people altogether, there must be quite a few who do fall within that class.
Yes, Your Honor, but there's only a small number of people that seek to come into
Well, that's what I'm asking about.
Yeah.
You see, that's now, if you think, now, as far as we're concerned, if they fall within that class, there's no reason given here why they should be excluded other than the normal processes.
Well, a couple of responses, Your Honor. First, in terms of the numbers.
I'm not asking about the numbers.
You're not asking.
I don't want to ask about
So in terms of the reason they should be excluded, one of the principal purposes of the proclamation is to exert diplomatic pressure on governments in order to get them to change and provide us with the
So you think they should be excluded?
Not if they meet the criteria.
Not if they meet the criteria.
For the waiver.
Okay.
So, Lee Gillard, that's a discussion about the waiver program.
Right.
Could you explain how that's been applied so far? And also the question of if this ban is kept in effect, whether there's any likelihood, depending on how the decision is written, that other countries could be added to the list.
Right. Those are both important questions. Taking the second one, we don't know how the opinion is going to be written, but there certainly would seem to be no reason if they uphold the travel ban that additional countries could not be added. So I don't think anybody should assume that it's just these countries or it's going to be reduced. I mean, it's certainly possible they'll take countries off. They took Chad off, but they also potentially could add countries if they claim those countries now meet the criteria. On the waiver, I think Diala put it right. There's just chaos. What came out at the argument is that there's only been 430 waivers. There's 150 million people covered by the ban. And if this 10-year-old little girl is not getting a waiver, then it's hard to imagine the criteria are being applied correctly.
One of the things I was astounded by is Noel Francisco saying, you know, if anyone found that they were being discriminated against, they could just appeal the decision, any individual.
Right. I'm not sure how that would happen. And I think the government has not been all that transparent about the waivers, and so that's a problem on top of all the problems created by the travel ban generally.
Well, I want to go to another case that you've been working on, which is related, which has to do, earlier this week, you presented arguments in a case involving 1,400 Iraqis who are slated for deportation from the U.S. Could you explain what the case is and who these Iraqis are?
Yeah, so these Iraqis are primarily Christian or minority sect Muslims. They've been living in the country for decades.
The U.S.
In the United States for decades. They all have final orders of removal based, some of them no conviction or minor convictions, but there's a range of convictions. But they've been living here forever because Iraq would not take them back. So they've all settled into life here. They've raised children, they've raised families, and they've been reporting every year, and they've been living peacefully in the country. And every prior administration has allowed them to stay. Well, the Trump administration now convinced Iraq to take them back. So be it. They're going to send them back. We don't think they should be sent back. But the really horrendous part is that they said, we're going to round them up all immediately and deport them right away, without giving them a chance to go back to court to show that if they're sent back to Iraq now as Christians, as minority sect Muslims, they are in danger of being tortured or killed by ISIS or other groups. And all we said to the federal court is, give them some time to show that they're going to be tortured. The Trump administration said, nope, we're going to remove them in 2 days, so be it. And so a federal district court said, look, I'm going to slow the process down so each one of them can go in and show that they are in serious danger if they're going to be removed. The federal court did that. Just simply slowed down the process, didn't say anybody has the right to remain here permanently, slowed the process down. The Trump administration decided to appeal that order to the Court of Appeals. So I argued that case yesterday in the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals in Cincinnati, and the government said the district court did not have authority even to slow the process down to allow these individuals to show that they'd be tortured. Unfortunately, the Trump administration is rounding up lots of groups en masse around the country. Christian Indonesians, Cambodians, Somalis, and I think there's going to be more, and not giving them any time to show that they're going to be tortured or killed if sent back. These are individuals who have been living in the country for decades, and yet now they're giving no time. And when federal judges have said, why do it so quickly? They've been here for decades. At least give them a little time. The administration said, our mission is to remove people. And so it just looks like they're trying to get the numbers of deportations up regardless of the circumstances.
Lee, before we wrap up, can you talk about the family separation case?
Yeah, I've been doing this work for over 25 years. The family separation practice is as horrific as anything I've ever seen. They are separating asylum-seeking mothers and fathers at the border from their little children, 18 months, 2 years, 3 years, and they don't actually have any rationale that they can present in court. The true reason is they want to deter legitimate asylum seekers from coming to this country, and so they're using the most draconian measure possible, taking a little kid away. The lead plaintiff in this case is a Congolese mom and her 7-year-old daughter who made it to this country. They passed their initial asylum screening, so they're legitimate asylum seekers. The mother, after 4 days, was put in another room and handcuffed and said, "You're going to be detained here in San Diego." She heard her little girl, then 6, in the other room screaming, "Please don't take me away from my mommy, please." The girl was taken away to Chicago. The mother wasn't even told where the little girl was going for 4 days. They were separated from 4 months. After the ACLU brought a lawsuit, the government said, well, we weren't really sure it was the true mom. The judge said, why not just give her a DNA test? They gave her a DNA test. Of course it was the mom, and anybody could have seen by the way she was screaming for her mother that it was the mom. The New York Times has now just reported that there are 700 kids who have been separated from their families. We have a class action case going on where there's a hearing in San Diego May 4th. We are hoping the judge will order that all these kids be reunited with their parents and the practice be stopped going forward.
But Lee, what's your sense, though? I mean, this is, as you've said, it's quite a widespread practice of the Trump administration.
Right.
Is there any way to stop them? I mean, will the courts come forward? I mean, we just reported on the Supreme Court. It seems likely that they're going to uphold the travel ban. Is there any reason to think that these other courts will act in a way to prevent these kinds of mass deportation?
All I can say is we're hopeful. And what we've been heartened by is that sometimes a practice is so draconian that it doesn't just split along normal ideological lines. Even people who don't necessarily agree with us on the macro immigration policy issues are coming forward, Republicans and Democrats, and saying, look, enough is enough. You cannot be separating an 18-month-old child. We're hoping that maybe even the administration says, hey, maybe we need to relook at this.
Well, we want to thank you both for being with us. Of course, we'll continue to follow this, and the ban decision will come down from the Supreme Court in June. Lee Gelernt is ACLU's National Immigrants' Rights Project. He's with it, and Diala Shamas is with the Center for Constitutional Rights. Special thanks to Al Jazeera English and Sharif Abdel-Quddus for that report. This is Democracy Now! Stay with us.
العشرة ماتت في حوش الأهل وحيدة ما يدرى بها الزمن الشجر جف لما اتهلك الجذع اتشقق واتكسر وين يا وطن وين يا زمن غضبان من سنين تتمطى وتفلك في جبينك بالألم وين يا وطن غضبان من سنين تتمطى وتفلك في جبينك بالألم دمك يسيح أنهار ملح وأنا جنبك بموت عطش حاولت أشرب لما انفجع أبكي المرارة اللي ما بتتبلع وين يا وطن وين يا زمن غضبان من
Yawatan means "Oh Homeland" by Sudanese-American band Al-Sara and the Nubatones. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
We turn now to a new expose by The Intercept that confirms how powerful Democratic officials have worked to crush competitive progressive candidates in primaries around the country, choosing instead to back moderate, business-friendly candidates. This comes after President Obama used his farewell address to encourage Americans upset about the outcome of the 2016 election to take action by running for office themselves.
If you're disappointed by your elected officials, grab a clipboard, get some signatures, and run for office yourself. Show up. Dive in. Stay at it. Sometimes you'll win. Sometimes you'll lose. Presuming a reservoir of goodness in other people, that can be a risk. And there will be times when the process will disappoint you.
Well, today we speak with a Colorado man who heeded Obama's call and found himself disappointed by the process after he was repeatedly pressured by powerful Democrats not to run. In fact, he recorded a conversation in which he was directly told to drop out of the Democratic primary for Colorado's 6th congressional district by none other than the second-ranking House Democrat. Now he's gone public with the recording, which was turned into an animated video by The Intercept. This is a clip. Listen carefully. Parts are hard to understand.
In Colorado's 6th district, one of the most competitive seats in the country, the DCCC moved in early to select Jason Crow, a corporate lawyer, as the party candidate, pushing resources, endorsements, and money to Crow while elbowing out progressive Democratic competitors. The Democratic Party often denies that they play favorites. What follows is a meeting between Congressman Steny Hoyer, the #2 Democrat in the House, and Levi Tillemann, a progressive running for the nomination for the Colorado seat.
Obviously, I want to talk to you about this congressional race.
Absolutely, that's what I expected.
Yeah.
You would like me to get out of the race.
And you keep saying I want you to get out. And of course, that's correct.
Yeah. I know you're fundraising for Crow.
Yeah.
You know.
I'm for Crow. I'm for Crow because the judgment was made very early on.
Muffled recording was Representative Steny Hoyer of Maryland, Nancy Pelosi's #2. You can hear him in that recording saying, "That's correct," when Levi Tillemann asks him if he'd like to get out of his primary race and that the decision to back his opponent was made early on. Well, for more, we go to Denver to speak with Levi Tillemann, a candidate in Colorado's Democratic primary for the 6th congressional district, which includes Denver. He's featured in the new expose by Lee Fong, investigative journalist at The Intercept, headlined "Secretly Taped Audio Reveals Democratic Official Pressuring Progressive to Bow Out of Election." We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Levi Tillemann, explain when this meeting took place and exactly what you were told.
This happened in December after months of our campaign receiving subtle and frequently not so subtle messages from Democratic insiders that there was a chosen candidate and it wasn't us, and that they were going to shovel money and resources towards a candidate who, quite frankly, I don't think represented the values of the district.
Explain exactly further how you met with Steny Hoyer, what the circumstances were.
Well, Hoyer was in town on a fundraising trip during which he was going to hold a closed-door fundraiser for my Democratic opponent, but he reached out to me and he asked if we could sit down and have a meeting at a hotel downtown. So I obliged, and I told him that I thought that we needed to fight for truth and democracy and for democratic values. And when I say that, that's not just democratic values with a big D. That's democracy with a small d. And he told me that, quite frankly, he thought the right thing to do was for Democrats to get in early and to put their weight behind a chosen candidate.
Well, I want to go back to another excerpt of The Intercept's animated video of the audio recording made by our guest, Levi Tillemann, of his meeting with Democratic Representative Steny Hoyer. Listen carefully.
Crow is the favorite, in no small part, Congressman Hoyer, because the DCCC not only put its finger on the scale, but started jumping on the scale very early on. And I'm born and raised a Democrat. I mean, it's undemocratic to have a small elite select someone and then try to rig the primary against the other people running. And that is basically what's been happening.
I hear you, and I disagree.
But you were part of that process
Absolutely.
as well. You said
Absolutely.
Yes, yeah.
I've been at this a long time.
Yeah.
When I said you need to get in strong, hard, and early, you disagree with me. Obviously, that's your choice.
And you guys are shoveling money at him.
We're going to continue.
You're going to continue to do it?
We are going to continue to do it.
So, Levi Tillemann, in that clip, Representative Hoyer says they'll continue to shovel money at your Democratic primary opponent, Jason Crow. Could you talk about that? Who is Jason Crow?
Well, Jason Crow is a white-collar criminal defense lawyer who didn't live in the district when he decided to run. But the bigger problem doesn't have to do with me or my Democratic opponent who has embraced this support. It has to do with the fact that this happened not just to my campaign, but to every other Democrat who is running in the district and to dozens of Democrats across the country. And what that means is that Washington insiders are controlling the agenda. They're pumping money towards candidates who are going to fight for corporations and Wall Street and the establishment and issues that progressives care about. Issues like a living wage and Medicare for all, and a complete transition to renewable energy by 2035, and finally impeaching Donald Trump. Those aren't getting the attention they deserve in Washington today.
Let's bring Lee Fang into this conversation, the Intercept investigative reporter with this expose. Lee, talk about Representative Steny Hoyer. Talk about his significance and the role of the DCCC, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, and the money it's raising, who it's choosing, and who it isn't. It's not just in the case of Levi Tillemann in the greater Aurora, Denver area.
That's right. Steny Hoyer is the #2 Democrat in the House. He also has ambitions to be the next Speaker of the House. And Steny Hoyer, elected from Maryland, really skyrocketed through the Democratic leadership ranks. He was elected in 1981, but he's played a part in the DCCC for his entire congressional career. He's been a big party fundraiser. He's the point person in the Democratic caucus to outreach to K Street to raise big bucks from lobbyists and from corporate PACs. And he's played a very pivotal role in going around the country and selecting establishment candidates and helping them fundraise and hopefully, in his perspective, making sure they win the general election and support his agenda once elected. Now, if you look at this Colorado race, it's very interesting. We have this very vivid picture of the dynamic because of this audio recording. But this is going on all across the country. We've been covering this since January. We did a big feature, but we've been covering this on a day-to-day basis. Steny Hoyer and the DCCC are going into primaries. They're saying, we'd like to have establishment candidates, folks who are very, very business-friendly, who won't rock the boat once they come into Congress, and they want those folks to win their party primaries. On the other hand, there are resistance and activists and other populists who are also vying for the nomination. These folks are promising bold progressive ideas, and the DCCC in public and in some cases in private they've said that they remain neutral in the primary, but that hasn't been the case. In case after case that we've reported on and kind of dug into, we've seen that the party is shoveling resources, money, polling, data, endorsements, media coverage to the establishment pick and elbowing out the progressive. So, this Colorado case is very interesting because Levi decided to go public. He decided to record this. He decided to fight back. But this is really going on from coast to coast in competitive elections.
Tell us particularly about what's happened in Houston.
Right. So another kind of case of this dynamic playing out in one district, I believe the 7th district of Texas. This is the Houston suburbs, long-held Republican seat, but Hillary Clinton won this district in 2016, meaning that Democrats think that this is a pickup opportunity. There are a number of Democrats that ran for this seat. The establishment favorite is a corporate lawyer named Lizzie Fletcher. There was another candidate, Laura Moser, who's an activist who's organized anti-Trump resistance efforts all across the country, done a lot of digital organizing. And the DCCC took the unusual step where right before the Texas primary, they dumped opposition research. That's the term of art for political dirt on Laura Moser, the progressive candidate. And they said they did this because they thought that Moser was too liberal for that district. But that tactic kind of backfired. Moser actually soared in the polls after that dirt was dumped and collected small dollar donations from donors all across the country and actually made the Texas runoff. So, Texas has a kind of a double election process, and that runoff election to select the nominee will be coming up in May.
Well, one of the other things that you mention in your piece has to do with the fact that before candidates are considered, the DCCC tells them they have to pass the Rolodex test. So can you explain what that is? And also the fact that the DCCC has renewed its partnership with the Blue Dog Caucus. So can you explain the significance of that?
Right. Well, we've talked to a number of candidates who say, they're first-time candidates, they're trying to learn the process, in Minnesota and Pennsylvania and elsewhere. We've heard this anecdote several times. But when they go to the DCCC and say, you know, we'd like to learn how to be a candidate, DCCC officials say, take out your smartphone and show us how you can raise $200,000, $250,000 just from the contacts on your smartphone. So there's kind of a moneyed barrier to even running for office. That's why the DCCC is kind of gravitating towards corporate lawyers or folks that have a lot of wealth. And, you know, all of these kind of battles within the Democratic Party are not going on in a vacuum, right? So, you know, on the left, there are some organizations affiliated with Bernie Sanders or other activist groups that are trying to influence these primaries, trying to hoist up more bold progressives as the Democratic nominee. But at the same time, the DCCC has renewed its partnership with the Blue Dog Caucus. The Blue Dog Caucus has historically been both culturally and economically conservative Democrats, folks who oppose gay marriage, but also are friendly to tax cuts for corporations, deregulation, cutting Social Security. Their numbers have been winnowed in recent elections. There's not many of them left in Congress, but the Blue Dog Caucus is now partnering with the DCCC to select establishment candidates, hoping that the Blue Dog Caucus will be renewed in this election cycle. And, you know, this is not kind of an even fight. The centrist and conservative PACs and the Blue Dog PAC is funded by Wall Street banks, big oil companies, utility interests, the defense contractors. They're pumping hundreds of thousands of dollars into these PACs to ensure establishment-friendly candidates win these nominations.
Lee Fang, we just have 30 seconds, but obviously I think people are hearing a lot of parallels to the 2016 election, and many feel that if Bernie Sanders had been the candidate, he could have beaten Donald Trump. Even though, of course, Hillary Clinton did get 3 million more votes than Donald Trump, but ultimately she did not prevail. What about those parallels and how the DNC dealt with Bernie Sanders?
Well, that's right. You know, poll after poll showed Bernie Sanders as the stronger general election candidate as against Donald Trump, but the Democratic Party pushed resources, media, polling data, everything they could to Hillary Clinton to make sure that she won the nomination and to elbow out Bernie Sanders. They did not learn from this self-inflicted wound. In fact, the Democratic Party is doubling down, and we're seeing those exact same tactics applied in congressional races all across the country.
Well, we want to thank you both for being with us. Lee Fang will link to your piece at The Intercept, and Levi Tillerman, a candidate in Colorado's Democratic primary for the 6th congressional district that includes a large area of Aurora right next to Denver. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we're going to talk about the Rohingya in Burma. Stay with us.
Refugee, 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 refugee. In your world, I'm a refugee. In your world, danger all around me, all around me, all around me. In your world, I must flee. I'm not free, I'm not free. Bring me shelter, I will not harm you. Bring me shelter, please. Bring me shelter, I will not harm you. I would shelter you. I am only what you are. I am only what you are. I am only what you are. What you are. What you are. Imagine your unbreakable world was broken. No more rules to protect.
Refugee by Maura Smiley. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
We end today's show looking at how aid agencies are scrambling to relocate tens of thousands of Rohingya refugees from crowded camps in Bangladesh ahead of the monsoon season in June. More than 1 million registered Rohingya refugees now live in southeastern Bangladesh after they fled in 2017 amid a Burmese military campaign of rape, murder and arson that the UN has called a, quote, textbook example of ethnic cleansing. Now the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees says at least 150,000 people are at, quote, high risk from mudslides and floods from the heavy rain in the next few months. Some could be moved to a recently formed island at the mouth of the Meghna River. This comes as more refugees are still crossing over from Burma.
Well, for more, we're joined in our New York studio by Tung Keen, president of the Burmese Rohingya Organization UK, a member of the Free Rohingya Coalition, born in Burma, but in 1982 he was rendered effectively stateless along with 1 million other ethnic Rohingya under a new nationality law. Welcome back to Democracy Now! You were just in the area. You've just returned. Tell us what you saw and your deep concerns about the moving of the Rohingya in Bangladesh who have fled what many are calling genocide in Burma.
Yes, these are victims of genocide. You know, they fled because they facing serious mass atrocities in their homeland. That's why they fled. What I have seen there is, you know, many Rohingyas women are not getting proper medical aid. If they are at least 30,000 Rohingya women are pregnant. There are some are rape victims there, rape women, and also, you know, at least 25,000 unaccompanied children there.
I mean, you're talking about Cox's Bazar, where you were home to the most densely populated refugee camp in the world?
Yes. So the challenge in here is now coming after a few weeks when heavy rain comes up. 500,000 population, their lives will be in danger because of flood and because of heavy rain. That is what's happened normally in that area. So it is very important international community must focus on that to protect these people, because I worry there will be next another natural disaster these Rohingya people will face. Last year they faced man-made disaster. What we have seen is genocide completely, you know, completely their atrocities against Rohingya has been going on for many years. That's been last stage of genocide, I should say. You know, yeah.
Well, can you talk about what plans are in place to relocate the Rohingya from Cox's Bazar?
As far as what I learned from international NGOs, they're trying to relocate. They map up some places and they're trying to relocate some Rohingyas, but we still do not know when and how they will do that.
And what about the question of repatriation? Have any of the Rohingyas returned to Burma?
For me, there is it cannot be happen repatriation because the Burmese military and government systematically, you know, driven them out from their homeland. So they created, the Burmese military and government created impossible situation for the Rohingyas. You know, when I was there last 3 weeks ago, the people are still fleeing from Burma to Bangladesh. And last 2 days ago, I received 5 families fled. Every day, Rohingya families are fleeing. At least 1 week, 10 to 15 families are fleeing because Burmese military and government is arresting many Rohingyas with false allegations, threatening them. We do not want to see you in this country.
Tung Keen, the UN Security Council is going to Bangladesh this weekend. What do you want to come out of this visit?
Firstly, as I met also the victim, they told me they want to see justice before they are return. They want to see these perpetrators where their children been burned alive, where their daughters been raped in front of them, where their son been slaughtered in front of them. They want justice. They want to see these perpetrators International Criminal Court. So this is important. We bring them International Criminal Court, firstly. Secondly, when we talk about repatriation, we want to return our homeland. That's what refugee told me. But they want protection. That's why we call in here protected return to protected homeland in Myanmar. So that international protection is needed. In Burma, as a whole country, you know, USDP party, NLD party, military, security forces, Buddhist monks, they do not want to see Rohingya as a citizen. They say illegal immigrants. So anytime mass atrocity will face again, before this happens, protection is needed when you return this refugees.
Tung Keen, we want to thank you for being with us, President of the Burmese Rohingya Organization UK. And this breaking news, President Trump's nominee to head the VA, Dr. Ronnie Jackson, has withdrawn from consideration. Democracy Now! Is accepting applications for our year-long paid social media fellowship. Check it out at democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.